just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. From WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, Friday Jobber, our magazine program, on the 26th of April 2019, as we roll through the month of April. We have the people from the University of Virginia here that Joe Biden eloquently introduced their city of Charlottesville, Virginia, to the American people, announcing his campaign on Thursday. And we also, as we normally do, dedicate this the program to Heather Heyer. And Heather Heyer's mother, incidentally, is here talking about Joe Biden. She was actually through via the Daily Beast, I should say. And we'll get to her. And we also, over the weekend here, later today, we'll have a special presentation from the this organization in Houston there, She the People, and the work that these grassroots organizations are doing. They had a conference at the Southern University there in Houston, a historic African-American university. There were roughly 1,700 of them, African-American, Latino women, and they had various candidates there, including, but not limited to, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Twitter King Booker, the senator from New Jersey, Castro, former housing administration type, Beto O'Rourke, out of El Paso, Texas. He was there too, and of course Bernie was there. They were all burning along, talking to these women. And it was interesting in that, and we'll have a special program, incidentally, on the the People, where we'll listen to a little over an hour. It's an informative program for those that didn't have an opportunity to listen to it. It was a live stream, but the live stream disappeared. You can still find it over at C-SPAN. Sometimes these things are much more difficult to find than one would think, particularly if they are produced by the mainstream media. Now, this Sheet of People organization is a relatively new organization. They're hiring people, so we'd say that they were invented specifically for the 2020 election campaign, and the fur is already flying here in the Washington Post. There is an article about Anita Hill, and it's in the New York Times, where Anita Hill is talking about a conversation she had with Joe Lunchbox Biden, and she wasn't buying any of it, if you pardon the pun, and she wants an apology not only for her, but the other women involved in the Clarence Thomas hearing. Now, the only thing I could say about the Clarence Thomas hearing, we looked at those hearings. Thomas was there, Anita Hill was there. The one weak spot I've always had with Anita Hill was a Republican. She was a member of a reactionary party. She went to a reactionary school in that she was at the Oral Roberts University. So effectively she came up from a very reactionary family, raised in rural Oklahoma someplace, and then she went on to stardom. She's now at Brandeis. During the trial of the century, the People versus Armfeldt James Simpson, she was one of those people that joined the lynch mob against O.J. Simpson. So she has a lot of flaws in her. So before she starts throwing rocks at the window of Joe Biden, she should check herself, as the young people would say. Because, again, that is one of the situations that comes out here. Some lady at this event in Houston said she believed Anita Hill. Well, the problem was not whether we believe Anita Hill didn't believe Anita Hill at the time, or even now. That case is way back there. We just have to get the circumstances with Anita Hill. As the late Justice Thurgood Marshall was saying about the nominee at that time, they had not nominated Thomas, and he didn't speak on that. In those days, they kept some sort of judicial decorum. Anyway, he said he could be a snake, and Thomas turned out to be a snake. But you have to understand, Anita Hill was tangled up with the snake. So very little you could say right there. She's a reactionary. She's been a reactionary. Her record is not there. Now, does that mean that Thomas did not do those things? No, it does not. Don't know what Thomas did or what Thomas didn't do. I have no idea there, but there were some other women that were willing to testify, and that's the problem they have with Joe Lunchbox Biden. Biden was a chair of the Judiciary Committee at the time, and he was responsible for that. He admitted he didn't do a very good job of conducting the hearings. They weren't really prepared. That was the old Senate, and they had not made the transition. They've not even made the transition today. Predominantly white males. They finally put old Dianne, I shouldn't say old, she wasn't as old in those days, but Dianne Feinstein on the committee. There were very few women in the Senate, so therefore they were not on. That was a prize committee there, and those characters were sitting there looking at Anita Hill and in amazement, and of course they're looking at Thomas. But the problem was Thomas should have never been confirmed. A number of people lied there, including Danforth. He, at the time, and he's a minister. I'm assuming he is now. He was then, and he was Thomas's mentor. Old Senator Danforth. He was from Missouri. Was supposedly a moderate of some type, but they all lied, and they lied about Thomas and the people that brought old Thomas up there. Thomas had worked in Missouri for Ralston Farina. Then he went in to work at the Equal Opportunities Office of what it was, EEOC, and he tried to destroy EEOC. He was carbon copy of what's his name that's running around there now with DJ Trump. And his name even escaped me there. He doesn't do very much, so he's at the housing administration with old DJ Trump. Anyway, nonetheless, in fact, he was a presidential candidate in 2016. And of course, DJ Trump sent him like a flying domino out of, as they say, the ball game. But this has been one of the big problems with so-called conservative / right-wing African Americans. They have always been out of the mainstream. They are people that are not in sync with the community at all. In fact, this scumbag Clarence Thomas had the audacity there to criticize his sister for being on relief, or what is kind of euphemistically called welfare, that Bill Clinton eliminated as we know it. A lot of opportunists running around in those days. It was just not Clarence Thomas by himself. And his history is he's a scumbag, so therefore he'll be a scumbag. But Anita Hill did not have clean hands. That doesn't negate what was there. But as far as the handling of Ms. Dr. Ford's hearing, totally different hearing. Wasn't handled by Joe Biden. It was handled by the modern day lynch mob. And this particular administration, the Trump administration, moved forward and forward to the right. They got this character to come in there, and he was a known right-winger, and now he is on the court, Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh had a very, very checkered type of existence. No doubt about it. Way beyond Clarence Thomas is supposedly watching porno movies and Coke cans and other kinds of stuff there. He's not the first one to do that. There's a number of justices on the court. They used to, this is in the old film days, they would set up and look at these porno films. They were, it wasn't where you can go to the internet and find anything you want or you don't want, is no doubt there. But the old films there, people would get them because they would, the Supreme Court review cases on what pornography was, and the evidence would come. So they wanted to absorb the evidence, so to speak. So in other words, that was the tail end of the 70s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And Clarence Thomas came a little bit later, but nonetheless, it, played into that particular array. But Joe Biden will be explaining this most of his campaign. He's made some strategic efforts to, as they say, gloss over any old problems that would be there. He hired someone named Sanders. I forget her first name now. She's 29 years old. She was a press secretary for Bernie Sanders. No relation, obviously. She's an African American. He hired her as, quote-unquote, a strategic advisor. She was not asked, incidentally, to return to the Sanders campaign this time around. So you're going to see all this jockeying here, as old H would say, these so-called hit pieces. They've hit Bernie Sanders in the post. I'm not sure who the post is running for president, but they've hit him. They hit Joe Lunchbox Biden, and many of the commentators. I would listen to the editor of the commentary, I forget his name right now, Rockman. Anyway, whatever his name was, not familiar with him. This was on BBC, NPR, maybe one of the two, and one of their morning programs, and they were talking about the most doable candidate against DJ Trump would be Joe Lunchbox Biden. For the working class, and you're talking about the European working class, but that is forgetting that Bernie Sanders did well in West Virginia, so it's not a matter there of appealing to so-called working class people. What will appeal to working class people more than anything else is they'll have a job in 2020. Now, there's mixed news of the GDP figures. Incidentally, don't want to jump off this, but this weekend we do have numbers manual. We'll deep dive into what the GDP is coming up. Where we now? It's about coming up on about 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. Anyway, I believe that's embargoed until 8 or 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And some predictions of where it would be. At one time they thought maybe 1%. Well, that's too low. Now maybe 2.5, even 3%. The problem there, these are rolling figures. They can't be sustained, and this is where the vulnerability is for DJ Trump, is in how the economy actually turns out. Gasoline, petrol prices were going up. Now they've kind of stabilized because there's surplus product in the U.S. because, again, they're taking fields offline. The Libyans are offline. Venezuela is offline pretty much. And it depends on what the Saudi is, the UAE, those people, how much they would pump, how much the Russian Federation is pumping. And all those people, Nigeria has its problems. All those people, but prices are moderately up. Around $70, they may have dropped down. I don't have the latest figures. They are trying to produce all they can to bring the revenue in, no doubt about that. So that is that story with Joe Biden, and at the same time, let me just get to this before. James Byrd, one of the killers of James Byrd, the last one actually, this is from the Dallas Morning News. They executed him, this particular person, for killing James Byrd. More than 2 decades after that, this was near the city of Jasper. These people picked up James Byrd, gave him a ride, and drug him by chains, etc. The man's name is John William King. He's 44 years old, and he got the lethal injection at the Texas State Prison. According to Byrd's sister, Clara Taylor, who watched King die, said he showed no remorse then, and no remorse during the execution. So it was one of those situations right there. So James Byrd's situation is settled. Now the other killer, what was his name? Lawrence Russell Brewer. He was executed. What would it be 8 years ago? 2011. And the other guy, Sean Allen Barry, he has life in prison. So nonetheless, Byrd was walking back from a friend's house. This is in 1998. We covered that July 7th. He was off a ride. The 49-year-old didn't drive. I didn't know that. And had been living on medical disability because of a seizure disorder. So he didn't drive because he had seizures. He couldn't drive. Anyway, that was James Byrd there. They beat Byrd, strapped him and bound him at the ankles with a 24-foot logging chain. Then they drug him 3 miles down the trail and rode, and Byrd was literally decapitated about 2 miles into the dragging when his body hit a covent. Anyway, a sad story of humankind's inhumanity to humankind. A drop of Byrd's blood was found on one of King's sandals. A cigarette butt with King's DNA was found near the area where the dragging occurred, and was as well as a lighter with his prison nickname KKK symbol. Anyway, over the years suggested the brutal slaying was not a hate crime. This is what King said was a hate crime. Anyway, nonetheless, all these Byrds are now either in jail for the rest of their lives. Is about the end of it. The defense argued that King admired racism, did not prove he was involved in Byrd's death, nor did his jailhouse tattoos, which included the KKK swastikas, and the Nazi lightning bolt, the words Aryan Pride. Boy, he had all those things going at one set. Anyway, nonetheless, Texas Perry, Rick Perry signed in 2001 a hate crime bill into law that enumerated groups protected from crimes motivated by hate, and doing what a 1993 hate law failed to do. So Texas Perry did something correct there, and the law built on the 93 bill that didn't list the victims groups because of opposition, including to gays and lesbians. Prosecutors rarely use the law. There's no doubt. You'll find some discussion when we do the event, She the People, the various candidates, Amy Klobuchar, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, etc., talk about hate and how to deal with it. Bird's name was given to the Matthew Shepard. You remember him? He was out in Utah. It was known as the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Protection Bill of Act of 2009. You notice they put Matthew Shepard. He was executed, hung on a wire fence out in Utah. In fact, I photographed it when I was in Utah the last time. So they found the outrage there, but actually James Byrd's was much more catastrophic than Matthew Shepard. But that's the way things tend to go. Many times in the past, these crimes were not called out. They have other words, and they were kind of covered up. That was from his sister Claire Boyd Taylor talking to NBC5 News. Now, at least by having a term, a box to put it in, you can really group it together. So that was it. At his funeral, James Byrd was remembered as a hard-working family man, father of three. He left behind a former wife, 2 daughters, and a son, both of his parents, and 6 sisters and a brother. A former vacuum cleaner salesman, Byrd had turned his life around after being paroled from state custody. Case, of course, drew national attention, no doubt about that. And people there were Eddie Johnson of Dallas, and a senator at the time, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, and the minister in charge was Dr. Al Sharpton. And even the transportation secretary, and I was on the Bill Clinton, Rodney Slater. I don't know where Rodney Slater is these days. And a message was read from Bill Clinton. And the Byrd funeral in 1998, the Reverend Jesse Jackson said there would be a scar on Jasper, Texas, still a scar on Jasper, Texas. Period. The city is now fighting its association with the brutal crime. When a technology company was looking at Jasper as a home of 300 new jobs, Eddie Hopkins, the head of the Jasper Economic Development Corporation, said that they convinced the company's president that the city was not defined by the crime. The sheriff there, when Byrd was slain, told NBC 5 last year that the city didn't murder James Byrd, but the atmosphere that did. The bigots were there. There were memorials to Byrd in Jasper, a bench outside the courthouse, a park named after him, but nothing that memorializes the crime itself. His relatives created the Byrd Foundation for Racial Healing, which counts among its high goals of highlighting awareness to the consequences of hate. 2 of Byrd's sisters hope to build a multicultural center and museum in Jasper to promote diversity in education. The city is 150 miles from Houston, was known more for its timber industry and tourism as Sam Rabin's Lake. Sam Rabin one time was a speaker of the House of Representatives. Jasper has an African-American mayor and other African-Americans in leadership positions, according to Baylor University. and Rasheen Lewis, who was running against the interim Mayor Gary Gatlin, was 12 when Bird was murdered. As long as we keep a blindfold to the incident, we will never be able to move before it. Lewis is hoping to become the city's second African-American mayor. Basically, the city become more and more of an African-American Latino historic site. We thought we would bring that to you while we were highlighting that. Let me get to Heather Heyer, and then we'll go to... she's being interviewed here in the Daily Beast. She breaks the silence on Joe Biden involving this Charlottesville, which we'll play as we leave here. 2020, Joe Biden didn't tell Susan Bro, that's Heather Heyer's mother, that he would be invoking her daughter's murder in Charlottesville. In August of 2017, in his presidential campaign launch, focusing on the battle for the soul of the American people. But I wasn't surprised. Bo, co-founder of the Heather Heyer Foundation, set up in her daughter's memory, told the Beast, most people do that sort of thing. They capitalize on whatever situation is handy. In other words, they're known as opportunists. He didn't reach out to me and didn't mention her by name specifically. And I noticed that the event, but he didn't mention Heather Heyer, and that's Heather Heyer. That's unfortunate. He probably knew we don't endorse the candidates. In the launch video for the presidential campaign, Biden said, "We're in a battle for the soul of this nation. American democracy was at stake under Trump." The Daily Beast reported the video included footage of men with a torch shouting, "The Jews will not replace us," and images of swastikas and Confederate flags at the right wing march that took place in Charlottesville. We saw Klansmen, white supremacists, neo-Nazis come out in the open, Biden said, their crazed face illuminated by torch, veins bulging and bearing the throngs of racism, chanting the same anti-Semitic vow that is heard across Europe in the 30s. But when we heard the words of the President of the United States, that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said that there were, quote, some fine people on both sides, very fine people on both sides. Biden condemned Trump for assigning the same moral equivalence to those spreading hate, as well as those with the courage to stand up against it. Some guy named James Fields was convicted last year of first-degree murder of Heather Heyer and multiple counts of malicious wounding. A jury recommended he serve life in prison. Last month, he also pled guilty to 29 of 30 federal hate crime charges in exchange of prosecutors not to seek the death penalty. Asked if she found Biden's video exploitive, Bro said, since we have not spoken, I'm glad Biden didn't specifically mention Heather. It's not all about her. Bro added, it has been almost 2 years since Heather died. I'm moving forward. I still grieve for my daughter, and I have a realistic understanding that this was a public event and people will use it however it suits them. It's just a fact of life. Biden, she said, for me, what he did this morning was he told me where he stood on one issue. Now to tell us on the rest of your platform, that's what I'm waiting to hear. I've seen the footage a lot lately for other reasons. Bro said it, like here we go again. I told reporters, those who were here at the time, have been traumatized by seeing it again and again. I have not spoken to them personally. President Trump, Bo said, told the Daily Beast, we should apply the same thought processes as I try to apply for myself.
think before you speak, and always tell the truth and be accountable for your actions. I still hold those things out for everyone, pretty much, and I used to teach my fourth graders that. She's a former teacher. I thought she was something like that. Anyway, bro would have been drawn, would not be drawn out on whether she wanted Trump to remain or be rejected from office. Everybody needs to be informed and make up their own decisions about who to vote. Bro said, adding, I am the public face of the foundation, and I can't do that. I have to make it clear to the public that the Heather Heyer Foundation does not endorse or support any candidate. What we are as a foundation, and I personally say, is pays very close attention to what candidates are saying and are doing. Do the two match up? Find a candidate who believes in what you believe. Make an informed decision. Don't just vote on party lines. Make sure you truly support that candidate and vote. Too many people still don't vote. White people say Charlottesville was such a major thing, but the murders of people of color in the name of civil rights have gone for decades and centuries. She's a very astute woman. Joe Biden video didn't surprise our trigger bro. It was more like, oh yeah, oh here we go again. At least twice a week there's a news story, documentary, magazine article mentioning Charlottesville and Heather. It's not only a common thing, it was a defining moment in the white history in many ways. A moment then white people finally paid attention. White people say Charlottesville was such a major thing, but the murders of people of color in the name of civil rights have gone for decades and for centuries. Biden's video had, bro said, shifted my day into high gear very suddenly. It was a little annoying to be woken at 7:20 to start dealing with it. It reminds me of the press turning up at my house at 9 a.m. after Heather died. This was not as intense as that. Anyway, Ms. Brobiar there, and we'll go to the University of Virginia. They are talking Joe Biden here. This is by Carl Klondike. He's the managing editor of the Crystal Ball. We'll see how crystal his ball is. Biden would arguably be the most experienced new president ever. He ran as a president who he will run as no training. Well, no, he didn't. He's been vice president. He's been around for a long time. If Joe Biden wins the presidency, he will bring with him nearly a half century of elected office holding experience, giving him perhaps the fullest resume of public service possessed by any new president ever. It may be that the Democrats are more open to a very experienced candidate than the Republicans were in 2016. Biden has a very long record to define, a burden that others, much less experienced candidates, do not have. He also will have to show that he has learned from past mistakes. I think he's working on some of those now, but he's making some others. In 1980, George H.W. Bush ran for the nomination president, a candidate of experience, using that slogan, a president we won't have to train. This was both a shot at the incumbent, Jimmy Carter, but was a one-term governor, a small-time state senator, before winning the presidency in 1976, the bicentennial year. The prime rival was Ronald Reagan, former two-term governor of California. That was in a time when Californians elected Republicans. Who was otherwise known for his acting career, who had to prove he had the chops to be president, and a former House member, National Republican chair, envoy to China, ambassador to the UN, director of the CIA. Bush was all those things. Evidently would become Reagan's running mate adding 8 years as vice president. And of course, the first President Bush became a president. He was elected president in 1988, ran against our own Professor Dukakis. He would be the oldest president, and of course goes in hand to hand with another political milestone. Biden, if elected, would be the oldest president. He would be 78 when the next president is inaugurated. That's in 2021. I believe DJ Trump would be 73 or so. Well, I think he'll be 73 this year. So yeah, he'd be 74, somewhere along there, 74, 75. So he's right behind. But Biden's experience and everything that comes with it is no guarantee to be an asset for this campaign. Well, if you have a record, it's easier, as you see in the Anita Hill thing, to stab. Anita Hill has, and of course Clarence Thomas is still sitting on the Supreme Court. And that does bring it into present effect. Otherwise, it would have very little effect at all. Has spent 44 years in major elective offices. He served from 1973 to 2009 in the Senate. He was in the Senate a long time. As a VP expert, Joel Goldstein argued in the Crystal Ball piece earlier this year, if one also counted Biden's pre-Senate election experience, 2 years in the Newcastle City Council, he had 46. Well, it doesn't matter. Biden's 46 personal public service experience would dwarf that of the current Democratic leader Martin Van Buren, who's 31 years in a public office, currently stands as the highest level there. Oh, I see. But Biden's sheer volume of years in the public office is understandable and would be unmatched by past presidents. That would be true. Bill Clinton's time as governor of Arkansas was long, a dozen years, but the state was much smaller, no doubt about that. But he had executive experience. But nowadays, executive experience doesn't count as much as possible. DJ Trump would point that out. DJ is better at handling some of the functions. However, though, DJ's staff has all been very weak, his general staff, and he deliberately keeps them that way, rotating them in and out. But he is a creature of the Republican Party. His entire presidency, basically his entire presidency, is predicated on what the Republican Party wants to do, from tax cuts to white supremacy. That American public picked a new president who was widely different than the one they currently have. Just compare Trump to Obama, or Obama to G.W. Bush. G.W. Bush to Clinton, to see the stylistic and substantive difference between the new president and his predecessor. American voters often want what they don't have. Well, anyway, we'll leave that out. The presidency isn't just a job that necessarily goes to only the most veteran politicians. Indeed. In fact, having a long record in office might be Biden's own doing. Well, it could be if you start going back to, and they do mention here the Anita Hill hearing. That was in 1991. No, 1991. Long time ago. Long time ago. 30 years. There was a different America coming there. You'd come off of 8 years of Ronald Reagan, and actually at the time 4 years of George H.W. Bush. So you had a long time. You had 12 years of reactionary leadership, or lack thereof. Reagan was asleep most of the time. American history is dotted with legendary senators who tried and failed multiple times to ascend to the presidency. There's no doubt about that. Henry Clay, Calhoun, Daniel Webster, who was the most qualified, the great wait a minute here. who represented the great triumvirate of the pre-Civil War Senate, but none got jobs despite seeking it repeatedly. Robert Taft, he was the Ohio Mr. Republican, unsuccessfully sought the GOP nomination several times, but he had to come up against I Like Ike. And they also mention in this, during World War II, the Vice President Hubert H. Humphrey was one of the great leaders of the liberal cause in the Senate and vehement anti-communist and red beta. He lost out winning the presidency to Tricky Dick, but it was a loss that was not a heavy loss. Another political lifer whose day finally came in 1968 was Tricky Dick himself. And recent nominees, Bob Dole. Well, Bob Dole ran in 96, as one colleague said at the time he was too old. And he was a senator, though, and he's still around. And the late John McCain in 2008 just wasn't his year. Depression hit him, and once it hit, John McCain never said it'll solve a lot of the voters. Since then, Barack Obama rode Mr. Lincoln's train all the way to the White House. Biden's years of experience, it could help him in ways too. Yes, it's true the Republicans select someone with zero experience in elected office. Trump, hypothetically, and let's see, Democrats could also eventually decide to nominate someone with no or little elective experience. An entrepreneur like Mr. Yang, doubtful there, and Marianne Williamson, or Beto O'Rourke, the pencil neck from South Bend. He wasn't incidentally in Houston there. Boogerham, who both have elective experience, not major there, penny ante operators. But we need to constantly remind ourselves that the parties are different and often value dissimilar things. Trump's insurgency was to us the culmination of several years' worth of anger by Republican voters directed at their party's leadership. The rise of the Tea Party, the emergence of primary challenges to sitting members of Congress suggest a desire for fresh leadership in the GOP, well, for more reactionary leadership. But that was how the corporate powers to be, they wanted a tax cut, and OGW, DJ delivered it. Now, they get in here, it's unclear whether something similar happened in the Democratic side. It might be for Representative Alexandria Ocasio. I know she'd be mentioned here. Cortez, primary victim in 2008 over Joe Crowley, once the number 4 in the House. Well, she certainly is extending more of a leftward force on the party than someone like Crowley. Well, no doubt about that. Crowley was just a go-along type operator. Democratic Party field is running on a platform that is to the left of both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Well, yeah, it is, but again, the times have changed. Barack Obama ran 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, 2008, 2007. Remember at the old courthouse, downstate Illinois, how it all started out. Anyway, and on the other hand, national polling from the past several years find the Democrats are less ideological than the Republicans and are less likely to express a desire for their party to move further away from the political center. They are more likely to value experience as a presidential nominee. The Pew Center plays into this, found that 40% of Democrats want their party to move to the left, while 53% wanted to move in a more moderate direction, as always. The Morning Consult found that amongst the several candidates' attributions, Democrats prioritize political experience, with 2/3 saying okay with that. The fact that Democratic Party's electorate has more moderates than Republican electorate, but the Democrats seem to value experience, are two factors that could benefit Biden. It could, and one of the things that does benefit Lunchbox is that the Anita Hill, the hugging of women, the negative things are coming out early. And what you always want to do in a political campaign is flush out everything you can, and you want to flush that out as quickly as you can. Because if it's a more than a one-day story, it evaporates after a few days. It doesn't come back. In other words, the Anita Hill thing, yeah, they're playing it up right now. And the bigger they play it up, the better it is actually for Joe Biden. It goes into sort of old hexagonal kind of thing, but DJ Trump figures all news is good news for him, whether it's positive, negative, as long as he gets his name out there. So Biden is getting his name out there, and we'll see how bumps he gets. Let me finish this up. One would think it would be Biden, if interested to see how many formal endorsements he gets. He'll get a lot of endorsements because he's been around. I wouldn't be surprised if President Obama endorses him. The Democratic Convention, and they will support whomever they want to be the nominee. However, in a change from 210, the superdelegates essentially will matter if the convention goes beyond the first ballot. It could, but again, you don't want to fracture things up there. The part of the value of Biden's experience could or should be sophisticated and a well-funded campaign. Well, he'll be well-funded. I'm not sure how sophisticated this campaign is, but he did go to the heart of the matter, the moral, so-called moral center of America, and using Charlottesville. True, he didn't mention Heber-Hire, but Heber-Hire is a symbol of Charlottesville. And Mrs. Bowe, a fourth grade teacher, which is a pivotal point in any child's learning experience, is that. But there's also damage that Biden is something else, a candidate who cannot be trained. I don't think, given the presidency of DJ Trump, Make America Great Again, BJ Trump is running one of these Happy Days commercials of the 50s. So in the 50s, people did value experience, or at least leadership. And Biden does have leadership. Now, Trump is a little bit different. Trump has some leadership abilities, but at the same time, they sort of float away. He's not really performing the art of the deal anymore. He's just living on fumes, basically speaking there. And you factor in this talk of impeachment, and we have a program which will come up later here on the impeachment process. Incidentally, this weekend, as we segue to do these sports, we'll be covering the week in the trial, the murder of Justine Ruchek DeMond. Ms. DeMond was murdered in the Midwest, Amy Klobuchar's hometown of Minneapolis. Shot dead in an alley by somebody named Noor. Noor was on the stand there talking about when he came from some country town in Somalia, and he had adjusting to America. He first lived in Chicago, and Chicago being a very large city. And then they moved on to the upper Midwest, Minneapolis, and he went to, some community college, and then to another college, and he had various jobs. He didn't sell vacuum cleaners, but he worked at a Radio Shack, various retail jobs. But it appears from his testimony that he was not very well suited for police work. Mr. Ruchek and Mr. DeMond, they were in the galleries, according to news reports, and they just shook their heads. You could obviously tell the guy had been trained, and he was a trained liar. I mean, that's about as far as we can go with him. Anyway, let me get away from that. We'll get in a special presentation there. So we have a number of things that are coming up. We also have the summit that'll be on BR on the World between the Chairman of the Democratic Republic of Korea and the President of the Russian Federation, V.I. Putin. They were in Vladivostok there and had a summit talking about the Korean Peninsula. Let me go now to ESPN. And the football draft's already out there. Mr. Murray went to the California Cardinals, and then it was Mr. Boyce, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Farrell, and Mr. White. Let's see. Mr. Murray was number one, a quarterback from Oklahoma. Bosa, B-O-S-A, was from Ohio State, and Williams from Alabama, Farrell from Clemson, and White from LSU. So those were the first round of picks. And I thought also Murray was thinking about playing baseball. Anyway, in the NBA, the Nuggets were... This is the series is tied 3-3. The Spurs 120, Nuggets 103. For hockey, Bruins 3-2 in an overtime. And this is the second round of the East. The Bruins lead it 1-0. And then the Blues over the Stars. And this is the second round of the West. The Blues are 3-2 in that contest. So we basically taken care of sport, PN, and where sport is. We're still debating how much in NFL coverage we'll have. Before I forget here, John Havlicek, one of the premier types, Celtics grade, died at 79 years old. Hondo, as he was called, was 6'5", which is a smaller player these days, because Michael Jordan is called a small forward. He's 6'6". Anyway, Havlicek played from 1962 to 1978, earning the 1974 final MVP honored along the way. Celtics all-time leader in games, points, and field goals. He revolutionized the role of the sixth man, his high energy, etc. There and on those teams, and from various players out there, we get to that. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I met John Havlicek at the time and place that I met Red Auerbach. Red Auerbach and Bill Russell. Red Auerbach was the manager of the Celtics. My high school, the autumn of 1961, my freshman year. He was still playing when I entered the league, and our friendship grew. Number 17, albeit class act there. And James Worthy. Remember James Worthy from the Lakers? See what Mr. Worthy had to say. My condolences to the Havlicek family. I was very fortunate to know and spend time with John Havlicek. Super nice and quite a sense of humor. John Havlicek dead at 79 there. And anyway, Havlicek eventually became not only a starter but a veteran leader for the Celtics. He came through clutch moments in the 1976 NBA Finals when he hit a basket near the end of the game of the second overtime, Game 5, when Boston would have gone to win against the Phoenix Suns in 3 overtimes. Ended his career with 13 All-Star nods and enduring admiration of his teammates. So John Havlicek. All right, on to Major League Baseball, somewhere here. Oops. Whoops, that's basketball. Anyway, we'll get to Major League Baseball now. I got And the Thursday night scores as soon as our workstation updates here. Well, here we go. D-backs 5 2-0 over the Pirates. Pirates were shut out. In other words, Dodgers 2-1 over our Cubbies. Dodgers had 4 hits, no errors, and the Cubbies 7 hits and 1 error. You don't win games like that. And Atlanta and the Reds, 4-2. And in 10, the Mariners 3-1 over the Phillies. Red Sox 7-3 over the Tigers. And the Green Monster, Cleveland 2-1 over the Astros in Houston. They don't beat the Astros very much, and more difficult. The loser was Cole Hamels. No, wait a minute. Cole was a loser. Yeah. And Yankees and Angels out in California. Angels 11-5. And finally, 14-2 was the score. Mariners over the Rangers in Seattle. Mr. Gomez was the winner. Mr. Heap was Mr. Hurd. Sorry about that. Was the loser there. And that will do it for sports. Let's quickly look at. I run a little bit over here. Sorry about that. We'll look quickly at some polling here. Go to Real Clear Politics. We'll do more of this on Saturday, the week that was, Saturday morning. And what we have left over, we'll do it on the Monday morning quarterback. And we have our special programming here. We'll have Numbers Man, that is our macroeconomics program. That'll be this weekend. And those other presentations here. And let's see what we have here. From YouGov, the approval rating for DJ Trump was at 45. From Reuters, the approval rating is 40. And let's see, general election, Trump versus Biden. Biden is up by 8, and this is on Wednesday, the only polling we have here. And that is basically about it. Mama out of Long Branch, New Jersey, had Biden at 27, Bernie at 20, Harris at 8. The Bull Game at 8, and Warren at 6, Beto O'Rourke and Booker at 2, Amy Klobuchar at 1. The Morning Consult, Biden at 30, and Bernie Sanders 24. Harris and Bulligan at 9 each, and Warren at 7. They pretty much bunched up together, and bringing up the rear, there, those two, Booker and company. It'll be interesting to see in the next couple of months if this, as we get into the spring and the summer, if these polling numbers will start to tighten up. But remember, we are way out of it. This season won't start to January of actually February of 2020. So in those terms, we have a long way to go, period. And how we get there, well, it'll be very hard to say there. Depending on how Joe Biden does. Joe Biden is still trying to get his organization up and going. And Elizabeth Warren, who has been in the single digits, has her organization up and going. And it'll be interesting to see how she does. Barack Obama was about where Elizabeth Warren and Beto O'Rourke are at the present time, and how the Midwest will play into this. Will there be other major things happening? We'll wait and see. Nonetheless, have a good weekend, everyone. Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on a spring morning, Friday morning.